So I'm working on a couple nightstands, and although these are case goods and not really what we work on in Intro or Furniture 1, a couple of things that I'm doing on these I thought might be of interest to you. So I'm going to show you how today kind of how I template route, and there's some sort of little hints on making template routing a little bit more successful. So that's what I'm going to talk about mostly today. So at the moment I'm going to show you a couple other things real quick. I've got a tabletop here in my legs, and then I'll talk a little bit about the template routing and the bit that I use. So just let me move the camera real quick, and I'll show you a few things I've got laid out here. All right, so this is my top, and again, like we talked about in Furniture 1, that first little table we made, we did that little table out of a single board, and the main reason for doing that is we can get a consistent grain and color match. So while I'm not going to be able to make these two nightstands out of a single board, again, that grain and color match is really important. So this top, actually my other top as well, all came from a single board. Basically what I took is the one end of the board, cut it in half, flipped it over, and then tried my best to get this long grain or straight grain to straight grain match rather than trying to get the cathedral match. So I think this is a pretty good glue up here. You can see a little bit of a color difference between these two pieces, but again, you kind of see those color differences elsewhere on the board. So I think it's going to work out pretty well, particularly once I get some oil on this. I think that that sort of differentiation here between those two colors was going to be pretty insignificant. I've also got my legs ready to go. These legs will be shaped a little bit later on, and again, I like using a hollow loose tenon. So I do these on my router table rather than the multi-router that we have at the school shop. So getting ready to go on all this stuff, and again, what I try to do on all these legs is get straight grain on all four sides. And again, that's easy to do if we use a rift sawn board or the rift sawn portion of a flat sawn board. So really important to get a nice sort of consistent look on an entire piece. So what we're going to look at today is doing a little template routing. So as you can see here, and I think I showed my Furniture 1 class that I make all these templates for repeatable pieces. What I've got marked on here is obviously what piece it goes for, and I've got some dimensions. I have a center line, and then I have my end lines marked. I try to keep this template a little bit longer than what I need. That way I can successfully route this whole piece without having to get run off the end and possibly ruining and sort of messing up the end of my piece. So I'll talk about this a little bit more here first. Also, what I try to do on these templates is here is that front rail that divides the drawer to the door on these nightstands. One of the nightstands is going to have three drawers rather than a door and a drawer, but the middle rail is still the same. So what I try to find with these pieces is here I've got grain that sort of arches, and if I hold this up here, you can see that arch in the grain mimics the arch of my piece. So again, another little detail that really makes a big difference in the final piece. So I try to do that as much as I possibly can. Obviously it means you have to pick a lot more wood when you go to the lumber store, and you have to be very selective about how you're going to use each portion of that board for the pieces of the furniture that you need. So I'm going to do this one a little bit later, but I just wanted to sort of point that out to you. A real good book, again, I mentioned probably I think both classes, is James Krenoff. It's either The Impractical Cabinet Maker or The Fine Art of Cabinet Making, where he talks about doing this type of thing pretty in depth. It was one of the first books that I read that really sort of opened my eyes to how to use grain to make a piece a little bit better than if you're just sort of insensitive to the figure of the wood. Okay. So also what I'm doing with these pieces, I took a quarter stock, resawed it, so now I'll have nice consistent grain. Top rail is the same as the bottom rail. the difference will be of on some of these will have panels, so I'll have to route a groove in the bottom one piece and the top of the other piece. But again, this keeps nice consistent grain sort of on that whole side of the piece. And again, it's cheaper to buy 8/4 stock than resaw it than it is to buy, you know, twice as much 4/4 stock. And I think in all these pieces I still wound up with about 7/8 thickness, so a little bit thicker than that 3/4, although on this particular piece you won't notice the thickness on this piece. You're going to see pretty much the profile of it. It's still having a little bit extra meat into these pieces, so when I cut the joinery, it just makes things a little bit safer, just a little bit stronger. So, so now let's talk about template routing. So in template routing, you generally want to round downhill. And what I mean by downhill is you can see we have a curve on this piece, sort of a symmetrical curve on both sides. Let me flip this over and this will make a little bit better sense. So the grain is pretty much running straight up down this piece. If I were to route this way when I get here, that router bit, as it's digging in sort of in this way, it has potential to grab this grain and tear it out. So typically what I want to do is run this way, and then for this side I want to run that way. So that presents a potential problem. You know, I've got this template on the bottom, so let me show you my bit here real quick, and this will make a little bit more sense. So this is a bit that I got from Infinity, and these are pretty nice bits. And by the way, I have the router unplugged at the moment. So I've got a couple carbide, insets in this. One tends to shear down, the other one tends to shear up. That means I get a nice clean cut on sort of the bottom and the top. Also, I have a bearing on the top and on the bottom. So I mentioned I want to route downhill. So my template is attached to these two pieces. Now, if I want to run downhill this way, my template's on the bottom and is going to engage on the bearing, the bearing on the bottom. As I need to do this side, if I were to keep it in the same orientation, now I'm running uphill and I have the potential to tear out that grain. So what I'll do is I'll flip the stack over, lower the bit until the bearing engages on my template on the top now, and now you can see I'm routing downhill again. So this means with this bit I can easily and quickly sort of run downhill on either side of this board. Now for these pieces, I've got them stuck together with this double-sided tape that I like to use, and this is called spec tape. Out of the double-sided tapes that I've used, I found spec tape to be sort of one of my favorite choice. It's thin, it's got this paper backing, it sticks really, really well. In fact, if you leave it on too long, it becomes very difficult to sort of separate the pieces. So I try to get this done as quickly as I can. Separate the pieces and pull that spec tape off so they don't stick too hard together. One other detail that I didn't mention with this is I attach my template to the pieces, then I go to my small bandsaw, and I want to cut these pieces fairly close to the profile of my template. That just means the bit has to work a little bit less hard to remove that material, and it's less prone to actually tearing out any of that sort of grain. And I really want to sort of be as careful as I can in protecting this profiled edge. If I mess it up, then this piece is pretty much scrapped and I gotta start over. So let me go ahead and get this set up real quick. Okay, here you can see I need to move it up just a little bit. So hopefully you can see this. My template's running down here. The cutting part of the cutting portion of the bit is engaged in my two pieces, so I'm pretty much ready to go. The other thing you want to sort of do when you're template routing, I've got a starting pin here. It becomes a little bit dangerous to just engage the workpiece into the spitting bit. So it's better to do, engage it on the starting pin, rotate it into work, and then remove it from the starting pin. Makes just things a lot easier to manage, and you're not accidentally engaging that workpiece too quickly into that rotating bit. Let me plug it in and we'll get started. All right, I tend to use a foot pedal with these. I just find it easier rather than having to reach around and switch, hit a switch on and off. I just step on it. Done here, so I've got that half done. Now I'm gonna move this bit. What did I do with my doohickey? And now I'm ready to I got a little bit of an edge profile left on here, so I wasn't careful where I placed that bit. But this piece, you can see I've got my profile nice and clean now. Now I'm ready to cut my joinery on the end. One other thing I didn't mention is now what I need to do is my witness marks here for my center line and my end lines. I need to transfer those to my piece so then I can go to the table saw and trim these to length. That's about it.